You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, Spurs trade rumors heading into the draft. A Spurs free agent rumor. Finally, going into Wednesday's draft. How's it going, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. I am recording this, I do want to note, on Tuesday evening, just before the draft, which takes place on Wednesday, June 25th, just because of all the trade rumors that are going on. So again, by the time you listen to this, who knows if something's happened, because, you know, the Spurs' name has been in a bunch of rumors. So that's where I want to begin, is go through the last rumors since the last episode. So obviously that when I last spoke to you all, the Spurs were in the midst of the Kevin Durant trade situation. Obviously, if you saw the news, they did not end up getting Kevin Durant. Houston Rockets were able to create a trade for Durant on Sunday. However, there has been some extra reporting that's come out regarding the Spurs and Durant here. So according to John Gambadaro of Arizona Sports Radio, who's very plugged into the Suns' situation, Gambo has been on the record of saying that the Spurs never actually made an offer to the Suns for Durant. And so what's notable there is that, we do know that Kirk Goldsberry, he was on a podcast about a week ago with Zach Lowe, where he mentioned that the Suns were actually asking for Stephon Castle or the number 2 pick. And obviously that was a no-brainer that the Spurs were not going to include Castle or number 2. So that's why maybe San Antonio just never went back to the negotiating table with Phoenix, with Gambo saying that, you know, the Spurs never actually made an offer to the Suns. So again, the Kevin Durant situation is over for the Spurs. Then on Tuesday, it was a little interesting. Early in the morning, Jake Fisher reports that the Spurs had interest in Kristaps Porzingis. Even Don Harris also said that the Spurs were, talks were intensifying in the last 24 hours. But then, as the afternoon came, the Atlanta Hawks came in and they got a deal done to get Porzingis from the Boston Celtics. It was a 3-team trade involving the Celtics, the Hawks, and the Nets. So no Porzingis to the Spurs. But they were in that rumor mill, regarding Porzingis. So now let's look at some of the other rumors that are kind of still up in the air here. So on Tuesday, Jake Fisher of the Steinline reported that the Spurs are looking at big men in the draft, and they may be looking to move up in the draft by using that 14th pick to try to move up, or maybe in the top 10. Who knows? We'll see. Some players, though, if they do select a big man with the 14th pick, there's 2 players that stick out here. There's Thomas Sorber of Georgetown. His mock average is 16.4, so he should be there at 14 for the Spurs. Or there is big man Joan Beringer, who has a mock average of 15.9. So again, both of those players should probably be there at 14 if the Spurs just want to wait. But if they do want to move up, Sam Vecini recently reported that the Spurs do have interest in Duke big man Kaman Malawach. And so what's interesting about Malawach is that he's expected to go in the top 10. So he could probably go anywhere from 6 through 9 in the draft order. So again, if the Spurs want him, they do need to move up, try to move 14 and I don't know what else it's going to take to go get him if that's the player they really want. So I was just thinking about, trading up, what would it take? And that's a tough question to answer right now, because obviously I think 14 would go, be included. But then, is it a player? And if the player with the most upside, I think for teams is probably Devin Vassell. So would the Spurs be looking to see if any of those teams drafting 6, 7, 8, or 9 willing to move 14 and Devin Vassell for number 10? I mean, not for number 10, for a chance to get Malawach? Or would it be the 14th pick and maybe 1 or 2 future first-round picks? Exactly what is the price that other teams want, those teams that are drafting from 6 through 9. So those 4 teams are the Washington Wizards have the 6th pick in the draft. The New Orleans Pelicans have the 7th pick. The New Jersey Nets have the 8th pick, and I would just say the Nets probably don't want any more first-round picks because they already have 5 first-round picks in the 2025 NBA draft happening on Wednesday. So again, if they were to take 14 for the Spurs, that'd be a 6th pick in the first round. And then there's the Toronto Raptors, who have the 9th pick. So again, we'll see if the Spurs make some sort of move to try to move up and go get Malawach. If again, they would have to create some sort of deal to move up in the draft. So again, we'll kind of see there. Also on Sunday, actually, no, this is an older rumor. So KOC has also said in past reporting, KOC Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo, that the Spurs have looked at packaging the 14th pick with the current player to go get someone. My idea the whole time for these last few weeks has been Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets, sending 14 And then maybe someone like Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes to make the contracts work, along with maybe like a 2030 pick swap for Cam Johnson. However, like I said, the Nets are now facing that situation where they have 5 current first round picks on Wednesday's draft, and so do they want a 6th pick, or can they create trades with someone else? So again, that's why I do think Cam Johnson is one of the more realistic moves, but it is difficult because of the Nets' situation where they already have a bunch of first round picks coming in on Wednesday's draft. Then the last rumor I want to go through is that on Sunday, Kevin O'Connor was on his own podcast with Tom Haberstroh, and KOC did mention that from what he's heard is that the Spurs are at least listing the offers for the number 2 pick. However, a GM he spoke with said that it would take a ridiculous haul to try to pry the number 2 pick from San Antonio. KOC did say that in the end he thinks the Spurs are going to end up taking Harper. Also, in his latest mock draft update, Jonathan Givony of ESPN wrote that the Spurs have zero interest in trade conversations for the number 2 pick per some of the rival teams that Givony has spoken with. So all in all, I do expect that the Spurs are going to hold on to number 2 on Wednesday and end up selecting Dylan Harper. All right, regarding free agency, there was one rumor this past week. So on Monday, Michael Scotto of Hoopside reported that the Spurs are expected to be among the teams with interest in unrestricted free agent Guerschon Yabusele, a 6'8" French forward. So just based on Yabusele where he's at right now, Philly does, in all the reporting, they do want him back. However, they are facing some financial limitations because he was signed with the veteran minimum last year with Philly. He, they don't really have his he only has non-bird rights, which is just basically almost like right near the veteran minimum. So it's hard for Philly to create a deal for him because of some of their cap sheet issues. So one of the issues is that Quentin Grimes, who had a good season with Philly when he got traded there, had is a restricted free agent. So Philly does want to bring him back as well. And then they have 3 players who are going to probably exercise their player options, and Kelly Oubre Jr., Andre Drummond, and Eric Gordon. So mainly, depending on what deal Grimes resigns with Philly for, the Sixers are going to probably have at most like their taxpayer mid-level exception at $5.6 million. And so is that the exception they want to give to Yabusele? And then if you're a team like the Spurs or someone else who has interest in Yabusele, can you just offer him more than that $5.6 million? Can you give him like $6 to $8 million? That's kind of where I think his market might be. So I think, the Spurs, if there's interest between he and Yabusele, I think they could get a deal done by splitting that non-tax mid-level exception of $14.1 million into a deal for like $7.5 million or $8 million for Yabusele, and seeing, if they can sign him. But again, that all those negotiations can't take place until Monday, June 30th, when free agency officially opens for negotiations. But again, that's at least one free agent rumor that's out there, is that the Spurs have interest in Guerschon Yabusele. Now, I went through a bunch of, free agents and trade targets in last week's episode, if you didn't listen to episode 39 of the Spotted Pod. However, I did add a few more free agents and trade targets because I finally finished all 30 of my cap sheets, kind of updating them and looking at some free agent and trade targets. So if you want to get an update on some of those players, visit the YouTube page for the Spotted Pod and look for a video called KD Isn't Coming to San Antonio. Now what? Some players mentioned in there for like the non-tax MLE range are wings Quentin Grimes, who's a restricted free agent, like I mentioned, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Gary Trent Jr., Malik Beasley, for the big men, Brook Lopez or Clint Capella. So again, those players are players to watch for the non-tax mid-level exception of $14.1 million. I do want to note, though, as soon as I started recording, Mark Stein and Jake Fisher put out a new newsletter update, and they did say that Nickeil Alexander-Walker could be looking at deals where a sign and trade might be possible with somebody. I think he mentioned Atlanta in there. So if Alexander-Walker is looking for a sign and trade, that means he's getting even more than the $14.1 million. That means he's probably getting north of that, because now they're having to execute a sign and trade with the Wolves if that's actually if that were to take place. Some players I mentioned in that video for splitting the non-tax mid-level exception. So again, maybe like $6 million, $8 million, $7.5 million, somewhere around that range, are players like Luke Kennard, Tim Hardaway Jr., Garrison Matthews, and Sam Merrill as shooters off the bench. Then for big men, I mentioned Luke Cornett in there, and then Al Horford I did put in there, but I think he's going to end up finding a way to re-sign with the Boston Celtics, especially with them unloading their roster right now, and they are going through some changes, obviously, but I think just his his legacy with that team, I think he ends up finding a deal that where he stays in Boston. But again, we'll see. Who knows? He ended up going to Philly one time in free agency. And then also from an update from last week. So on last week's episode, I did mention that Daniel Gafford would be a good player for the Spurs to look at as a big man off the bench. He did obviously this past week agree to a contract extension with the Mavericks for $54 million for 3 years. Now, the good thing about that for his trade eligibility is that he is still trade eligible even after that extension whenever it gets signed. And so that does mean that, I think now that he's on a multi-year deal, I think it takes a little bit more to get someone like Gafford. So I think for sure the 14th pick probably has to be included if the Spurs want him. But Mark Stein did write after the deal was announced, or I guess reported, that the Mavericks do want to keep both Gafford and PJ Washington. They know that teams are going to be calling about those players because those are players. Washington's in the final year of his deal. Gafford was in the final year of his deal, and so those players, are players that teams are going to be calling about. But Mark Stein did say that Dallas is hoping to get to keep both of those players. But again, we'll see what happens here. I would also say that another player I mentioned last week was Jakob Poeltl, as a trade target for the Spurs. But I would say we can cross his name off the list just for a few reasons here. We saw during the Kevin Durant negotiations that the Raptors pulled. They said they weren't going to put Poeltl in any kind of deal for Durant. So obviously Toronto has long-term investment in Poeltl right now. Also, that's as I mentioned last week's episode, that's a really high salary, paying your backup center $20 million a year. And then there's been some reporting lately that if Poeltl doesn't get traded from Toronto, he and the Raptors are expected to start talking about a contract extension. And then lastly, a player who I didn't mention, but I just want to throw out his name right now, is Naz Reid, because I know a lot of Spurs fans are excited, to go after, if the Spurs should go after him. And so from what I've seen about Naz is that the Spurs just aren't going to have the cap space to go after a player like him. It would take a sign and trade. So let me explain the situation. So he's going to command, if he even opts out of his player option, if he were to opt out of his player option, he would he's probably going to command a salary like in the over $20 million, north of $20 million. And also, I've seen a lot of reporting where the Wolves are expecting to either re-sign him or extend his contract. That's one of the reasons why they didn't want to do the KD deal, is that they wanted to keep a lot of their team together, and also that they didn't get the assurances from KD that he would re-sign there. So let's just say though that oh, actually, this has been reporting. I think it was Mark Stein or Jake Fisher reported that the Wolves are at least expecting that teams are going to have interest in Naz Reid if he opts out of his deal, his player option. So they're going to call about sign and trade to other teams, and so that gets interesting. So remember that in the sign and trade, there's got to be three parties involved. There's got to be the free agent, which is Naz Reid. There's got to be the current team, which is the Wolves, and they're going to want something back as part of that sign and trade. And then there's going to be the new team. For this example, we'll use the Spurs. So basically, what that new team has to do is they have to throw out a number to Naz that the Wolves just don't want to match. Or so right now his market, from what I've seen, could be anywhere from like a low end of $19 million per season to a high end of $26 million per season. So again, if somebody says we'll give you $28 million, and the Wolves aren't willing to go there with Naz, well, then Minnesota can look at a sign and trade where again all three parties have to agree on a number. I will say though, the Wolves are probably in the driver's seat here to try to get him back, just because of the situation out here in the free agent landscape right now, where only the Brooklyn Nets are expected to have real cap space. I know the Pistons can create maybe like 17, 18 million, but again, that may not be enough for the Wolves to let Naz Reid go. But again, regarding the Spurs, if they were to have interest in Naz Reid, that's why it would be difficult to get a contract together for him, just because San Antonio right now does not have any cap space going into free agency. Let's keep going. All right, finally, let's go ahead and talk about the draft that's coming up here on Wednesday in a few hours from the time that I'm recording this episode. So for the second pick, I do expect the Spurs to take Dylan Harper out of Rutgers, and I've talked about him multiple times here on the Spotted Pod, but it's the 14th pick that gets interesting. So let's go to a scenario where the Spurs do keep the 14th pick and draft someone. So I want to talk about three players who have both been in rumors, with the Spurs having interest in these players, but also some players that I've done some scouting reports on. So the first player is Thomas Sorber of Georgetown. So there have been multiple reports that the Spurs do have interest in him, and he's also been going to San Antonio on a few mock drafts that I've seen. So I did write a full scouting report over on the spotupshot.com. So if you want to read that, check out the spotupshot.com. But I'm going to give you just a brief scouting report my scouting report from that piece that I wrote. So he's a 6'10" center, 19 years old, 7'6" wingspan. I use Dean Oliver's method here of asking two key questions here. The first question is, what gets him on the court? What's he going to immediately do to help your team? He's more so about the defensive end. So he's going to provide you rim protection, contesting shots very well for a big defensive rebounding and communication, kind of anchoring the defense, communicating off ball, telling players, what to do in different coverages. So he's very vocal out there with his teammates. On offense, he's a little bit more polished in rolling and finishing, off pick and roll or DHO action. He hustles out there with offensive rebounding, and he's showing some playmaking growth as well with his passing game. So again, those are the things that are going to get him on the court. What's going to cause him to have some trouble or fail at times? From what I saw in my scouting report, jump shooting, his jump shot's still kind of coming along right now. I think he could get tested with the speed at the NBA level, especially having to go on switching on smaller guards that are very quick, trying to go by him or isolate him. And then lastly, decision making is still something he's kind of learning right now. And so, what would his role be with San Antonio if they were to draft him? I think he could get a chance as the backup center. Maybe playing like 15 minutes per night behind Wemby. And then, again, so I think he'd be ready to get some NBA minutes, I think, as a backup center, even though he's just 19 years old. So Sam Vecenie also has his NBA draft guide, which I definitely urge you to check out over from The Athletic. But in there, he has a career projection model, and he basically thinks that, let's just say long-term for Sorber. He does see Sorber as a rotation player in the NBA and who has a lot of upside. So again, that's where Vecenie kind of sees him in the future. And I do look up to Vecenie with his draft, work and scouting and, just all his observations with the draft. The next player who I'm very intrigued by for the 14th pick for the Spurs is Cedric Coward out of Washington State. So Jonathan Givony in his mock draft did mention that the Spurs are looking at Coward right now. And so I haven't written a scouting report on Coward, but I was basically writing one in my head, or at least taking notes. So I watched a lot of film on him on Monday, and I also did a lot of research, looking into his game, who he is as a player, reading some scouting reports. And so I'm going to basically give my scouting report here, on Coward from what I saw in my observations and the notes that I took. So let's see here. So after high school, he went to a D3 college for his freshman year. Then he went to Eastern Washington University for 2 years. And now in his senior season, he ended up going to Washington State. But at Washington State, he sustained a shoulder injury in a practice. And so we basically only got to see him in 6 games at Washington State this past season. So again, that's the tricky part about Coward, is that there's only 6 games of data at the in his final year with Washington State, but he looked really good in his data, or in those games for Washington State. So because of, like I said, he's already played 4 years in college. He is an older rookie. By rookie standards, he's going to be 22 when he starts his rookie season, which means that after his 3rd year of NBA experience, when he's ready to go for a contract extension, he would be 24. And let's just say, things went well and he ends up signing a rookie contract extension for 5 years. Then basically, he'd be 29 by the time that 5-year extension is over. So basically, to have him from like age 22 to 29, if everything went well and he ends up extending and playing well, on your team. Now, what's intriguing about him is his, some of his physical attributes here. So we have, first of all, he's about 6'6". He's like 6'5" without shoes, but of course he's going to wear shoes in the game, so I say 6'6". He has a 8'10" standing reach, a 7'3" wingspan, and he's 213 pounds. So what I did was I went through a bunch of past combine measurements of players coming into the NBA from the past few years. And so here are some players where, again, Coward's, near them, these players in the physical comps in either like standing reach or wingspan, or, maybe not so much height or weight. So the first player was, I mentioned here, he weighs less than all these players that I'm about to mention. So think of him physically more like a shorter Kawhi Leonard. He's closer to the height of Draymond Green. He's shorter than like Jeremy Grant, but also comps measure very well, very, comparable. A shorter OG Anunoby, and then lastly, closer to the height of a PJ Washington. So again, those are players, wing players here in the NBA that he kind of, and someone like Draymond's more like a power forward, where he kind of has some of those physical comps coming into the NBA here. So from those same questions, what gets him on the floor on offense? You again, it's a small sample size, so it's hard to. I want to keep saying that just because again, and he looked really good in the sample size, from what he was doing. But here's what sticks out on offense. He has a very fluid jump shot. Whether off the catch, spot up action, in the pull up, he just knows for being at the college level, he knows how to just get to his spots in the mid range. He can make the catch and shoot threes, the spot up threes, knows how to work off screen action. From what I saw, he just reminded me of a very sound shooter and just kind of be able to get to his space, navigate space, and that it reminded me of more so of Chris Middleton in his game, a lot of Chris Middleton. Then he has a physical size. where he's able to basically like if he's bigger than someone, like there was a 6'3" guard I saw him trying to guard him, and he took that dude to the post and really just went at him very aggressively and finished near the rim with multiple layups. So he has a big body for a guard. And then he's learning how to pass. Drew multiple double teams because when he was on the floor, the other team knew he's probably their leading scorer, and so they were sending a lot of double teams at him. And he's very comfortable about being patient in the post and waiting his spots before kind of passing out to find his open shooters. And then one thing lastly I saw was one of the more intangibles, which is he's a good teammate from what I saw. Again, it's only 6 games, but from what I saw is like when he's on the court with his teammates, he's constantly cheering them on. He gets hyped when somebody scores a bucket or makes a play. He's sometimes they had him kind of like running like the power forward role in their offense within the inside the arc. So he's comfortable. If he thinks that one of his shooters behind him is wide open for a 3, he'll screen for that player and just again doing the small things like DHO action, just being involved in the actions, not even if it's not him who's taking the shot or things like that. And then something else I saw is even on the bench, he's constantly on his feet, cheering his teammates on, even if he's not in the game. And then I went back and listened to a few of his interviews, and he's also very humble. He's very confident in his game, but he also talks about making the right pass. He's not going to. Sometimes they want him to be more aggressive because he's not being as aggressive. But again, he's more so out there to make the right plays for his teammates. On defense, some things I saw that stand out to me: his length, he just super long arms. Pick off steals. He can pick off steals as a help defender. He can test shots. He fights for position in the post and can deny entry passes. He's using his length and size to switch, switchable defender. And then also I put that he's able to cover ground pretty well. He can be like in the paint, have 1 foot of the paint. Somebody kicks out to a 3, and he can run out there and contest that shot very well. And then he has pretty good timing on his blocks again. Out there on the defensive end. So a lot of defensive tools as well. What causes him to fail, or what's going to make him struggle? Again, it's limited tape, so it's hard to find as many mistakes here. But from what I saw is that he's not really as aggressive in going to the rim in the half court, and that's also something about that Sam Vecini wrote about in his scouting report on Coward. And then I looked more so to what Vecini wrote here because he's obviously seen more of Coward and followed him longer. So Vecini did say that he has a shaky handle that's still kind of developing for him, and sometimes he doesn't stay as locked in on defense, like he not taking possessions off, but just not mainly being engaged for all the possessions out there. So again, that was from Vecini from what he saw. And so, but Vecini is very high on him. In his career projection model, he does see that down the road, he can't see Coward as a starter with some all-star tool swing, according to Vecini. All right, the last player I want to mention here is Joan Beringer of Cedevita Olympia overseas. So, his full scouting report is also up on spotupshot.com. I had a chance to check out his game and see who he is as a player. So, just a quick brief scouting report on him. 6'11", big without shoes, 7'5" wingspan. He's only 18 years old. Some of his physical comps coming into the NBA echo Willie Cauley-Stein, Nick Richards, and Kello Ware. What gets him on the floor? It's mainly his defense. Good rim protection skills, good timing on his blocks. Active out there. And deterring some shot attempts. He has a lot of length out there. Able to kind of go out to the perimeter, stay within inbounds, and then a lot of mobility as well. Kind of again moves very fluid for a big man. Doesn't really move like a typical power forward or center. More so almost like a very tall guy, like in a small forward's kind of body. So again, very fluid out there. So he's going to get on the floor for the defensive reasons. Offensively, I didn't see as much. That's still an area of growth for him. I saw he's constantly moving. He has a lot of energy. He's constantly just moving around out there on offense, and then he's also able to crash the offensive glass. So again, that's the issue where when I talk about what's going to cause him to fail or where he needs to grow, I just put mainly his offense. Again, he's just very raw offensively. From what I saw, he had some difficulty, rolling out of the pick and roll or DHO action, and kind of holds onto the ball a little bit too much. Kind of waits a little bit too long to scan the floor. I also put that he kind of clogs the paint where teammates at times I watched in the tape like where some of the players were asking him like to move out of the way as they wanted to drive inside, and he kind of just roaming around like in the dunker spot and just trying to find his way in the offense. So again, I think that's where he's a little bit more raw offensively than maybe someone like Sorber or Coward is there on the offensive end. As far as his role, again, I think the Spurs could try him as their backup center, but I think he would end up going to Austin just because of how much he needs to develop his offensive game. So I think that in the event they took someone like Beringer, I think that they should also look at signing a veteran big man veteran center just in case he's not quite ready yet in year one for the NBA level. And so again, that's kind of where I see Beringer. According to Vecini, his career projection model has him as a rotation player, long term in the NBA, and he has some upside swing. All right, so this closes out the episode of the Spot Up Pod. We'll see who the Spurs draft on Wednesday, in round 1, and then on Thursday in round 2 with the 38th pick. And yeah, we'll see if they even make a pick with the 14th pick or if they trade that pick. As far as when my next episode is going to go up, I'm trying to get an episode out before Monday, June 30th, which is the start of free agency. But obviously, with all these rumors going on daily right now involving the Spurs, I don't want to put out all information. I want to try to get the most updated information out there. So make sure to check out the Spot Up Pod YouTube page, though. I would say that I have been putting up some short videos frequently, YouTube shorts, on the articles that I'm writing. But then also I'm giving some instant reaction videos, like when KD ended up signing with the Rockets. I immediately put up an instant reaction video that you can check out there on the YouTubes on the Spot Up Pod YouTube page. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.